There is a thing in your airport that has been broken for a while. Maybe it is an escalator with a paper sign taped to the handrail. Maybe it is a moving walkway that has not moved in a year, or a gate area where half the outlets are dead and everyone is sitting on the floor by the one that works. And you have probably had the thought I have had, which arrives so fast it does not feel like a thought at all. It is an airport. The airport should fix it. That second thought is where this gets interesting, because at a great many airports it is simply wrong. Not in a scandalous way, in a contractual way. The building belongs to a public authority. That much is usually true. But who cleans it, who repairs it, who replaces the escalator when it finally dies, is decided by a lease. And a lease is a private agreement between two parties, neither of whom is the person standing on the broken escalator. So I read 3 of them. 3 real agreements at 3 major American airports, all public. They answer the same question in 3 different ways, and by the end of this, you will not be able to walk through a terminal without wondering which of the 3 you are standing in. Start at Newark, because the language there is unusually blunt. In July of 2010, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey and Continental Airlines signed a supplemental agreement covering Terminal C at Newark Liberty. It was filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission as an exhibit to a quarterly report, which is the only reason you and I get to read it. Airline leases are not generally published. This one is public because a public company had to attach it to a form. Most of it concerns a baggage screening project. But in the recitals, the part where the 2 parties write down the facts they both agree on before getting to the new business, there is a single sentence. The lessee is responsible for the operation, maintenance, and management of Terminal C. 3 separate things are being handed over there, and we tend to hear them as one word. Operation, which is running the place day to day. Maintenance, which is keeping it working. And management, which is deciding what gets done and when. Not the airline's counters, not its lounges and back offices. The terminal. The same page tells you where it comes from. An agreement of lease dated the 11th of January 1985, carrying Port Authority lease number ANA-170. So this is not a recent experiment. It has been running at that terminal since the middle of the 1980s, amended supplement after supplement for about 4 decades. The one I read is number 26. Now, a caution, and I am putting it here rather than bearing it at the end. That sentence is a recital. It is the 2 parties describing what the underlying lease says. It is not the maintenance clause itself. The original 1985 lease predates electronic filing and is not public. I went looking. It is not there. So, precisely, both parties in a signed instrument state that the airline holds operation, maintenance, and management of that terminal. Those are the parties' own words in a document they both executed. What I cannot show you is the clause itself, or what it excludes, or what happens at Newark if the airline does not perform. Those live in a document I do not have. Here is why stopping at Newark would have made this video wrong. Tampa International publishes its airline agreement in full. Article 6, Section 2, Paragraph D, and the list is the whole point. The authority shall maintain 1. Loading bridges. 2. Preconditioned air systems. 3. Associated 400 Hz units. 4. Inbound and outbound baggage handling systems. 5. Lightning detection systems, that is, close to the exact opposite of Newark. At Tampa, the jet bridge is the airport's problem. So is the preconditioned air that keeps the cabin breathable at the gate, so is the ground power, and so is the baggage system that occasionally eats your suitcase. And the airline side of the same agreement is deliberately narrow. The airline shall operate and maintain at its own expense any improvements or equipment installed by the airline for the exclusive use of the airline. So the Tampa line is, you maintain what you put in for yourself. Everything structural, everything shared, and most of what a passenger touches on the way to the aircraft stays with the authority. Then there is Southwest Florida International at Fort Myers. Same article number. Very nearly the same sentence. with 3 words inserted that change the entire meaning. The authority shall maintain loading bridges owned by authority, preconditioned air systems owned by authority, aircraft ground power units owned by authority, owned by authority. At Fort Myers, the question is not who leases the space or who installed the equipment. It is who holds title. 2 jet bridges side by side on the same concourse can land on opposite sides of that clause, depending on who bought them. 3 airports, 3 answers. There is no national standard here, and no default that quietly applies when a contract is silent. There is only the document, and the documents disagree with each other, which means the phrase airline lease terminal is doing a lot of work it cannot support. It sounds like one thing, it is at least 3. So why would an airline want this? Taking on a building is not obviously a prize. One piece of context first, and I'm going to label it carefully because it is old. In a March 1998 testimony to Congress, the Government Accountability Office published gate data the airports themselves had reported. At Newark, 94 jet gates, 79 of them under exclusive use leases, 43 of those to Continental. Now the label. That data is from 1996, not 1998, and the lease expiry dates it lists have all since passed. Continental's ran to 2013. I'm not going to tell you the share today because I could not find a current count, and inventing one is the thing this channel exists not to do. What it establishes is only this. Exclusive long-term airline control of terminal space was already ordinary 30 years ago. It is not a novelty. It is the water. And the logic of the bargain is sitting right there in the Tampa clause. Exclusive use for the exclusive benefit of one airline, maintained at that airline's expense. An airline with control of its own space can renovate on its own schedule, brand it, and not stand in line behind every other carrier waiting for the authority's capital budget. That is worth a great deal. The trade is the control comes with the broom. You cannot have exclusive use of a building and also have somebody else responsible for keeping it running. Every one of these agreements is, underneath, a negotiation about where along that line the 2 parties sit. There is a financial consequence here that is not obvious, and it connects to the last episode. Airport revenue is federally restricted. If an airport takes federal grant money, what that airport collects has to stay with the airport. But watch how the federal policy defines what counts. All fees, charges, rents, or other payments received by or accruing to the sponsor are considered to be airport revenue, received by or accruing to the sponsor. It turns entirely on whether the money reaches the public authority. So the rent the airline pays for that terminal is airport revenue, bound by federal law from the moment it arrives. But the money the airline spends maintaining its own leasehold never touches the authority at all. It goes from the airline to a contractor. It is not received by the sponsor, so it is not airport revenue, and the restriction does not reach it. Nobody is exploiting anything there. That is just where the boundary falls. The federal rule follows the money into the authority's hands and stops at the edge of what the authority receives, which raises the obvious question. If the party holding the obligation just does not do it, then what? At Newark, I cannot answer that, because that is exactly the clause I do not have. At Tampa, I can, because it is sitting in the same article I have already read you. Should the airline fail to perform its material obligations, the authority shall have the right to enter the airline premises and perform such activities. There are conditions. Other than in an emergency, the authority has to give advance written notice of non-compliance, not to exceed 10 days. And if the cure genuinely cannot be effected inside 10 days, the airline gets longer on a schedule the authority approves, and then the sentence that gives the whole thing teeth. If such right is exercised, the airline shall pay the authority, upon receipt of invoice, the cost of such services plus 10%. And non-payment of that invoice is itself deemed a default of the agreement. That is a well-built clause. The airport does not have to sue anybody to get a broken thing fixed, and it does not have to prove damages. It gives notice, waits the 10 days, sends its own crews in, and bills the airline for the work plus a margin. And if the airline refuses to pay that invoice, it is in default of the entire agreement, which puts everything else it has at that airport at risk. Look at what that does to the incentive. The consequence of neglect is not a penalty you can quietly budget for. It is losing control of your own premises on somebody else's schedule at a price you did not negotiate, with 10% on top. Let me put one object on the table and trace it, because this is the entire episode in one image. The jet bridge. The tunnel you walk down to get onto the aircraft. Everybody has used one. Nobody has ever wondered who owns it. At Tampa International, the authority shall maintain loading bridges. That is the airport. At Southwest Florida International, the authority shall maintain loading bridges owned by authority. That is the airport if the airport bought it, and a different answer if it did not. At Newark Terminal C, the lessee is responsible for the operation, maintenance, and management of the terminal. That is the airline. Same object, same question, 3 different holders. And the person walking down it has no way to tell which of the 3 they are in. There is no sign. The information exists, it is written down, and it is not addressed to them. So the escalator is broken. Who do you tell? Start with the obvious problem. You are not a party to the lease. 2 organizations signed that document, and you were not one of them. You cannot enforce a contract you are not party to, and standing inside the thing the contract is about does not change that. So take it up a level to the federal government. And here the Federal Aviation Administration is unusually direct about the limits of its own authority. From an order it issued in January of 2021, the FAA's role is not to enforce the lease terms between the parties to an agreement, but to enforce the federal obligations in the grant agreements between an airport sponsor and the federal government. The agency will not referee the lease. It enforces the deal between the airport and Washington, not the deal between the airport and its tenant, which looks like a dead end. The lease decides everything. You are not in the lease, and the regulator will not touch the lease. Except there is one more document underneath all of these, and it is the one that actually answers the question. When an airport sponsor takes federal money, it signs a set of assurances, promises made to the federal government and attached to the grant. One of them is Grant Assurance 19, Operation and Maintenance, implementing Title 49 of the United States Code, Section 4, 7107. The airport and all facilities which are necessary to serve the aeronautical users of the airport, other than facilities owned or controlled by the United States, shall be operated at all times in a safe and serviceable condition. Read the scope of that. All facilities necessary to serve the aeronautical users, not the ones the sponsor happens to maintain directly, not the ones it did not lease out, all of them. And that promise runs from the sponsor to the federal government. The airline is not a party to it and cannot be made one by a lease. So a sponsor can hand the work to a tenant and hand the cost to a tenant and still owe that assurance to Washington the following morning. The lease moves the labor. It moves the invoice. It does not move the obligation, which makes the honest answer the airport authority. Not because the authority swings the wrench, because often it does not. Because the authority is the party that promised the federal government a safe and serviceable building, and that promise has no exception for the parts it leased away. So, back to the escalator with the paper sign taped to the handrail. The honest answer to who should fix that is, it depends on a document you have never seen. The documents genuinely differ from one airport to the next, and the only thing that does not vary is that the public authority which took the federal money still owes somebody a safe and serviceable building, and none of this is a scandal. I want to be plain about that, because it would be easy to cut this same material into something that sounds like one. A lease that puts maintenance onto a tenant is ordinary commercial practice. You and your landlord have a smaller version of the same argument. Nobody here is accused of anything, and I have not shown you one document that alleges wrongdoing, because in this pile, there is not one. What is interesting is the gap between what a building looks like it is and what it contractually is. It looks like public infrastructure uniformly, all the way through. Parts of it are, in law, a tenant's leasehold, maintained on a private schedule under an instrument signed before most of the people walking through it were born. And if you take one thing from this, take the habit rather than the terminal. When you find yourself annoyed at an institution, the useful question is almost never who is to blame. It is, which document decides this, and am I in it? Usually you are not. That is not a conspiracy. It is just how the paperwork is arranged, and almost nobody goes and looks. Every clause in this video is on screen with the agreement it came from. All 3 agreements are public. The citations are in the description, and if you want to check any one of them against what I have told you, you can.